We'll try it again. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I will start with some opening comments, and I want to thank you on behalf of the entire EPSA team for each of you joining us today at our second Competitive Power Summit. It's a privilege to be here with each of you again this year, many of whom represent different sectors of our industry, and we're delighted to have you here for an engaging day of discussion. I'm Todd Snitchler, EPSA's President and CEO, and of course, we want to make sure that we thank all of those who are here, but for those who can't be, if you're feeling like you'd like to share any highlights, feel free to use hashtag EPSA23 on any social media posts that you would use, for those of you that do that sort of thing and can stay out of trouble. Before we get going, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors of today's event who helped make all of this possible. First, a big thank you to FTI Consulting for sponsoring this morning's breakfast, and there may even be a named cocktail this afternoon in their honor. We also want to recognize our other generous sponsors without whom we couldn't do this today. Our platinum sponsors are Calpine and LS Power, our gold sponsors, Shell Energy and BP, our silver sponsors, Competitive Power Ventures, GenOn, Tenaska, Vistra Corp, DCI Group, McDermott Will & Emery, and Cogentrix. Our bronze sponsors include J-Power USA, Harris Beach, RTO Insider, Eastern Generation. Today's lunch is sponsored by Virtual Armor, and you'll hear a little bit from them at lunch. Our reception sponsor is Orion Strategies, and finally our media sponsor is RTO Insider. So with that bit of business taken care of, let's get to the business at hand. I'm always told that the professionals say you should open with a joke to warm up the audience, and I'm not sure that's required with this crowd, but I'm going to give it a shot. So, two electrons walk into a bar together. Wait, that's not right. Electrons would never walk in together. They aren't attracted to each other, and they don't walk for that matter. So maybe we're not going to do that. So instead of trying to do another terrible electricity joke, I'm going to revert to my roots and to help get us started. As many of you know, I'm a student of history, and before we begin today, I thought maybe you could use a refresher on some of the significant, if scandalous, history that is tied to our location here at the Mayflower Hotel. Former Attorney General Jeff Sessions definitely did not meet with a Russian ambassador here when they were both in the hotel in April of 2016. On the other hand, former New York Governor Eliot Spitzer did have a meeting with someone here, though she was not a foreign ambassador, but perhaps better known as someone practicing the oldest profession. And not to be outdone, and perhaps the most famous or infamous incident with a politician was D.C.'s own mayor at the time, Marion Barry, who was convicted of possession of cocaine here at the hotel back in 1989. There are, of course, lots of other stories involving JFK, Monica Lewinsky, German spies, and the FBI, but I'll let the Daily Beast summarize it when they wrote, "It's a reminder that despite the Mayflower's reputation for privacy, the secrets of its most high-profile patrons have never remained secret for long." But enough about the salacious stories about our venue. I can assure you we won't have any of those stories coming from today's events, at least that I'm aware of. So let's shift gears and focus on our conversations today. You may also know that I'm a bit of a movie fan, and I think there are some great lessons to be learned from films that can teach us important points or drive home some lessons. Call it the object lesson. So as we'll talk about today, the energy system and the resources and technology that are needed to power the grid of the future can generate a lot of disagreement about how we can and will get there. In fact, one of my favorite movies provides us with a scene that establishes one way to frame up these challenges. If you've seen The Godfather, which I assume most of you that are my age or older have, you'll recall the scene where Virgil Sollozzo meets with Don Corleone to discuss how they may be able to do business together and what that means for both parties. At the high point of the scene, Don Corleone denies the request to work together, but says to Mr. Sollozzo, "Best of luck to you, so long as your interests aren't opposed to mine." And that sentiment in many ways encapsulates at least part of the dilemma that we face. You'll recall from the movie that there were opposing interests that ultimately did collide, and it didn't end well, frankly, for either party. The importance of the energy system challenges that we are trying to address in the electricity world, however, means we can't afford for things to go badly like they did in the movie. The public won't accept it, the public won't be able to pay for it, and they shouldn't be asked to put up with it. Instead, I think we need to think broadly about how we can collaborate to ensure reliability. We're living and working through a period of energy expansion, not merely passively watching an energy transition. Changing conditions and circumstances, the climate, shifting resource supply to the grid, new technologies, and changing state and federal policies all mean that we have to adapt and be more flexible now more than ever before. Reality has been a top priority for as long as competitive markets have been in place, but competing interests from policymakers and regulators have drawn attention away from that first responsibility. Instead of focusing on a safe, least cost, reliable power, state and federal policies are increasingly focusing on advancing specific technologies or achieving specific time-bound emission reduction goals. And the outcome of those decisions has a real material impact on the financial health and operations of some resources that may be out of favor with the political class, but are needed to ensure reliability. The outcome of diffused attention paid to a set of competing priorities is concerning. It raises concern about reliance interests of asset owners and the continuing investability of certain markets, which will negatively impact reliability. And finally, infrastructure and permitting siting challenges and operational misalignment of the natural gas and electric sectors further impact reliable system operations. Extreme weather and changing resources are currently squeezing the grid from both sides. We have all heard the warnings from NERC, and I'm confident our morning keynote speaker, Jim Robb, will have more to say about that shortly, and from many of the RTOs and ISOs that we are at an increasingly stressful time for our power system, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that from our afternoon keynote speaker, Manu Asana, later today. But it's a challenge that we can overcome with thoughtful and holistic planning from system operators and policymakers alike. EPSA believes that markets are our best path to assure reliability, reduce carbon emissions, and ensure that it doesn't cost any more than necessary, even as the grid rapidly changes in comparison to prior evolutions of the power system. To be clear, there's no question that reducing emissions is a priority, and one the competitive power sector has embraced as it has significantly reduced emissions over the past few decades. But as we continue to work to bring down emissions, we can't lose sight of our commitment to our first priority, which must be reliability. Over the past 3 decades, competitive markets have been critical tools to reduce emissions and drive innovation across the United States. Regions with competitive power markets governed by ISOs have reduced their power sector emissions by about 35% since 2005, while non-ISO regions have only reduced their power sector emissions by about 27% over the same period. Well-designed markets equipped with technology-neutral policies to incentivize cutting emissions in the most efficient way possible can be our best tool to fight climate change and create a breeding ground for innovative solutions. And innovation will be the key to ensuring a successful energy expansion. There will be a transition, to be sure. In many ways, it's already underway. But we will need even more power in the future, not just replacing existing fossil-generated power or building more transmission lines if we're to reduce emissions cost-effectively without sacrificing reliability. Renewables and natural gas have been the greatest shift on the power supply side in our sector in the past century. But what lies ahead looks to be something different and beyond mere resource selection. And why is it critical that we address those challenges today? Because electrification not only increases absolute demand, it increases the stakes. Electrification on a massive scale represents the most significant shift in demand in decades. That level of electrification will require more of everything. More renewables, yes, but also vastly more dispatchable resources like natural gas, battery storage, and nuclear that back it up. Reserve margins may grow, but the focus on energy is what is in demand, and more new generation resources of all types will have to come online at a pace that can ensure demand can be adequately met. We'll also need more transmission, more pipelines, and better coordination between the natural gas industry and the electric industry to ensure that generators have the fuel supplies they need, even in the most extreme of weather conditions. The more electrified our homes, businesses, and industries become, from vehicles to schools to manufacturing, the more vital a reliable grid becomes to all of our daily lives. Yes, some degree of electrification is coming in short order, but I think we have to acknowledge that the safety net that fossil fuels have historically provided and the role they will be required to play in the future will change, but will simply not be eliminated quickly. That makes reliability more important than ever, and it makes cost-effective implementation more important than ever. And, as has always been the case, it makes the successful delivery of power a mandatory goal we must achieve. EPSA has urged policymakers and regulators to be clear-eyed about these priorities when making policy and wholesale market decisions, and we cannot merely focus on the future to the detriment of the present. We need to preserve and invest in resources that will ensure the lights stay on, and we need to craft policies that reflect the harsh realities of what failure would mean. Policyholders and stakeholders must ground their ambitions in what can realistically be achieved without sacrificing the duty to provide customers with reliable and cost-effective electricity. Make no mistake, the rapid drop in costs for wind, solar, and battery storage resources is one of the 21st century's great innovation success stories. With the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there is every reason to believe that these resources will make up an ever larger share of the electric generation resource mix, and markets themselves will have to adapt in response to these changes. This is going to require a holistic set of reforms that include adjusting planning parameters for demand levels and weather scenarios, defining adequate reliability services, and finding new ways to compensate those resources while crafting better policies to ensure critical fuel supplies for dispatchable generation. As a result of the passage of the IRA and the anticipated growth in zero-emission resources, it's time for owners and advocates of non-dispatchable resources to take full ownership of their critical role in ensuring reliability of the grid as well. Reliability is a concern for all types of resources. With the continued support for these non-dispatchable resources and the support they will receive over the next decade, it's incumbent upon them to embrace their reliability responsibilities. Non-dispatchable resources require dispatchable resources as backup, and we all succeed when market structures and regulators actively acknowledge and support that notion. The greater the role of non-dispatchable renewable energy sources, the more critical that dispatchable resources become. And that may not be something that some want to hear, but now we are all in this together, non-dispatchable and dispatchable resources alike. We as an industry do not have the luxury of choosing whether we want to address the challenges ahead. Customers depend on generators to produce power to keep their way of life energized every day, and we're up to meeting the challenge. But customers also pay for the system. They depend on us to deliver reliable power, and we have to keep these two priorities as our focus. Policy aims may change, but all consumers ultimately want the same thing. They want clean, reliable, affordable electricity that lets them live their lives. Said another way, and I've said this before, consumers want three things: lights on, beer cold, water warm, and it's our job to make sure that we provide it. So today we'll talk with experts about how to do that, how change is coming to the system, and how we can effectively manage the risks and costs of the energy expansion while also dealing with what appears to be an expanding set of cyber and physical risks to the system.